we should prevent people from using cell phones. And the comment I put in, and again, I'll go back to that conference I ran 2 weeks ago for those independent garden centers. I said, I just ran, a 2-day event and in the sessions, I saw maybe 10 minutes total in those 2 days of cell phone usage at the sessions. And the only time that people were on their cell phones during sessions was when I was giving people some time to do an activity individually, and some people finished before other people, and then you need to give it a little extra time for the solo folks. The rest of the time, people are interacting with each other all the time. Even the folks who are leading sessions, the crowdsourced sessions, are running them as discussions. No one is on their cell phone. They're engaged. They're learning actively, and that's when learning is maximized.
I would like to see a test. I would like to have a test at a conference. And what's interesting is that a friend of mine recently went to see Dave Chappelle and saw his stand-up routine, and they collected in these lovely little cases. They collected all of the cell phones. Nobody could go in with a cell phone for the performance. And what ended up happening is she and lots of other people took photos of their cell phones being lovingly cared for as they had to give them over before they went into the room. And my theory, I have a theory. I would guess that, and they talked about it, right? Later, they talk about it because that was part of the experience. They were seeing something so special and different that they had to give over their cell phone so they couldn't share it with anybody else. It added to the exclusivity. And I wonder how much more closely they paid attention. I wonder, instead of tweeting out the joke or the really great shot or whatever, like, look how close I was to him. Instead, they were there. And, I would love to see the perceived value from the people who attended a meeting. And maybe for some of the sessions, they had to do that. And for some, they didn't. And what would come as a result of that? I would be very interested to see what would happen.
I still think, again, I didn't stop anyone from using their cell phone for those 2 days of that conference, but no one ever really did significantly. The best of all worlds is the world where it's like, I'm so engaged in this, I don't want to touch my cell phone. I don't want to miss anything. That's the ideal. And I'm not saying that, fully engaged in everything all the time. That's ridiculous.
Right.
That's
Right.
But I believe, and Mike's, I've been doing this for 25 plus years now, that it's possible to create meetings, the kind that I do, where people are engaged optimally and distraction is at a minimum. And I'm not saying that no one at my meetings ever, spaces out or starts thinking about, a dinner or whatever, or their problems back home or whatever. Of course they do. But from an observational viewpoint, I can tell you that it's quantitatively different in terms of what I see from the outside. You do not see people
so two things. I got two things. So just one more thing on that. It'd be great to have an opportunity. Like maybe that's becomes something where people have the option to turn them in. They're safely cared for while they're in the room. And then I want to speak to, there's a question that came in, and Kathy asks, would it be useful to do a post-attendee survey for an annual event, even if it was 9 months ago?
Absolutely. I was just going to respond to that. I saw that on the chat as well. I think so, yes, for the reasons that we've already talked about. No one ever does it. And again, the best thing to do is to tell people at the event you're going to do this. The more you can create an event that's congruent with what you then do afterwards, the better. If your event it's clearly about creating community in a way that works for the participants, then people are going to say, yeah, that's great that, this is all part of the whole thing, that 6 months later, they're going to ask me what I learned here and, what was the value here and so on. That's great. So I think it is useful. It would be useful to do a post-attendee survey, even if you haven't announced it and so on. Again, I think you should design it carefully and thoughtfully, and you need to have someone, you do not want to have someone, you do not want to outsource the interviews. If you're going to do this live, by phone, then you want to have someone who's really great. If you're going to create a written survey, it should be short and really precise and ask the questions that you really want to ask about in a way that makes it easy for people to answer, with maybe some examples. You might so that it's as easy as possible to answer them. But I think phone surveys are frankly the best. Again, person-to-person surveys. If your event is personable, if you can afford to have someone, a member of your association, spend a few hours surveying, sample of your attendees, participants, I think that is incredibly valuable.
That's such an interesting point. One association that I used to work for before I went went to the dark side and got into consulting and everything. They had someone who would call if they had been a member and their membership had lapsed for long enough that they were like, why aren't you a member? Was it and finding out. And it was a huge percentage would come back into becoming a member because of that personal contact. And they had a chance to share stories. And I remember the woman, her name was Candace, came to me and told me these incredible stories from people who had been members. A lot of times they just didn't think anybody had noticed that they had lapsed, and it kind of made them sad. So they didn't rejoin. And all it took was a phone conversation with a stranger to bring them back. And it does make me curious on that personal connection, how much further we would get if we reached out, and just even if it was a handful of people, well, more than a handful, but you know what I'm saying? If we reached out and asked for that feedback, what we would hear back. I mean, just the personal contact would be, I think, valuable.
Mm-hmm. Right. It depends how many people go. And I think Joan asked about, the conference, how this scales. The conference I keep mentioning had 160 people at it. So, that association is probably not going to reach out to everyone by phone. On the other hand, you could do a blanket survey by email and do a smaller sample by phone. And again, you could pick those people if you're interested, or it could be a random sample. It depends what you wanted to do. But I think people being given a well-crafted short survey, and also, and I think this is key, being given a rationale that makes sense, that this is not, some intern isn't just sending out the survey because they were told to do it and so on, and the results are going to be stuck in a drawer and never looked at. You need to make a promise, and that's part of what I do at events to get high, SurveyMonkey style evaluations up, is to say, we will read every single one of these things, and we will take them into account when we next get together. And if you tell people that and they believe it, they're much more likely to fill the thing in, because we will fill out these. I know every time I have an interaction with anybody online these days, I get 2 hours later, I get an automated email saying, we want to know what your interaction was with. So, wait, I don't have time for this, but a conference that I was at for 2 days, that was really in my industry, my association, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll.
Yeah, we did last week. We had an interview, and we were talking about drones and drone safety. I was just envisioning having a drone deliver my survey. Maybe I'd pay attention to it then. Don't do that, guys. Don't do it. But don't. No. But the thing is that how about that? If I don't recognize the number, I won't answer the call. If it is an unsolicited email that is even though I understand that surveys can be so important many, many times, and I'm embarrassed to admit it to you guys, especially many, many times I ignore that survey. So what would get me? What would get me, Adrian? I don't know. And anyone who's watching right now.
Let's say, so I keep using this association, but it's a typical association. They actually send out a weekly email. The head of the association sends out a weekly email. It's full of information and so on. It comes every Monday morning. It comes out and so forth. So that's and if you've got that going and people are looking at that, again, it's a small association, probably, 400 or 500 members altogether, these 400 or 500 businesses in the United States. But if you've got that coming out every week, then sure, you can put in that, and you can say, there are a lot of ways you could do it. You can, the executive director can say, we really want to discover what was of value for you, long-term value at this event. So you put it in the regular communications and so on. People do a good job of that. You put that in, and maybe you give people an option to click on the link and say, I'd be willing to talk to someone for 15 minutes at a mutually agreeable time about my experience at this conference. Or you could say, we will be contacting, a sample of you at random, and so look for an email from so-and-so, in a few days. Yeah. If you're selected, you'll get one, and we'd really appreciate having the time to talk to you. I mean, that's the kind of thing.
I love this over here. I just have to say, Kathy's saying, a freebie, half off in attendance in the future. Oh my gosh, you get me for that. Incentive. Sure, incentive. And Anne says, like many, I'm more likely to respond if I had a really great or bad experience. If it was just okay, maybe not.
I think that's a good point. Again, it's emotion. We human beings are driven by their emotions, not their intellect so much. So yeah, if the experience was great, we have a really positive or a really negative emotional experience at an event, we're much more likely to want to be engaged about it, one way or another.
Yeah. It's so true. I am trying to get better about that. I have control your perceptions next to me. I'm constantly trying to remember, be logical, KiKi, be logical, even in this interview, Adrian. So the next logical step is to say, what can we do now? So we've had all of these we've had this discussion, and it's really great, and Karen, hey, great to see you. She says, personally, I'd rather have an actual brief conversation about something rather than a radio button or a scale of 1 to 5 style survey. If someone's calling, they really do care what I think and aren't just gathering stats.
Just go back to associations of communities of practice. I mean, the reason I do what I do is because, I love, and I know you do too, KiKi, facilitating connection between people. And online is better than none at all, but face-to-face is best, and I mean, video chats are pretty good, but, face-to-face is the best. Or a phone call, isn't bad. And so if your association is about community, is about, which I think the best associations are, that they build community, and that what creates loyalty, and means that people are more likely to pay those membership fees and come to the events and so on and support the initiatives of that association, then sure, if you want to find out what people thought about your event, I'll talk to them, and give them a call or whatever. And I agree, that's more powerful than a survey. On the other hand, it's what a mentor of mine talked about a long time ago, the law of raspberry jam. You can have a lot of impact with someone with a small number of people, or you can have a much flatter impact broadcasting to a large number of people. I write a book, and a lot of people read the book, and it has, maybe a small impact on most of those people, but get people in an event of mine for a day or so, and I can, really have a big impact on people sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah, make those calls.
Yeah, and I'm saying there's so many great comments over here. Joan says, see comment and questions about observation and what Harrison Owen noted and created. I personally like women's restroom lines. You hear so much. Me too. Right. Anne says it's time consuming, especially if you're chatty like me. Karen says, that said, my work just doesn't have the bandwidth for that right now. And then, Kathy says, I love that, Karen. You could plug in your responses afterwards to use the metrics. See, they tell me scam likely when they call. It's lovely.
Yeah.
So,
that's good. Yeah, I don't think you do cold. I mean, you could try cold calling, but I think, a little email preparation beforehand and a newsletter preparation beforehand, and ideally an announcement at the conference. We will poll, 10% of you will be lucky enough to be, we will poll you 6 months from now to find out what you thought this conference was like. And, and if you want to offer an incentive and have people volunteer, that's cool too. Whatever you think works.
Yeah. Joan says, seriously, I've instructed clients' committees to carry around little books or electronic devices to make note of whatever they overhear. We just don't listen and watch enough. Oh God, that is so true. And Tim says, I'd be curious to see how many people would embrace a call me for a quick chat instead of the survey option. Yeah.
Right. And some people are just, so there's always going to be bias. I mean, it's like political telephone surveying, which is a very hard thing to do because, most people don't answer the phone these days. And then the people who do are biased in, particular ways that you have to take account of. I want to go back to something earlier in the chat that I don't think we've mentioned, and I do want to acknowledge that it's true that some people are using their digital devices these days to make notes. So I think the folk there were probably smaller number of millennials at the conference I keep referring to a couple of weeks ago. And that's maybe why I saw